Good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this Policy Forum, Latin America and the Caribbean, the Road to Glasgow, organized in partnership with the Dominican Republic, in collaboration with the Alliance of Small Island States and the UN Foundation. Thank you to all. We are particularly grateful to our partners in the Dominican Republic who led the climate and security discussions during their elected membership in the Security Council, and this legacy continues. As you know, the Security Council will be discussing climate at the highest levels under the Irish presidency during the General Assembly High-Level Week later this month. As the recent IPCC report warns, human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region of the world. The time to act is now. Without concerted action, we will continue to experience an increasing amount of severe and extreme weather events, including in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is experiencing increasingly frequent and intense hurricanes, storms, and droughts. Here in New York, of course, just a week ago, we experienced devastating floods from the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, with storms that killed more than 40 people in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. And meanwhile, in a dramatic counterpoint, fires continue out west amid generational drought. We are burning and drowning at the same time. These weather events, on top of the impact of COVID-19, present dire challenges for the entire hemisphere, including Latin America and the Caribbean, where hard-won development gains are at risk of being reversed and can only be averted with strong leadership and cooperation from the international community, including through increasing direct access to funding. In the face of such challenges, several countries in the region are showing vital leadership and innovation on this issue, like the Dominican Republic. But also, for example, Barbados, which has committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2030, and Antigua and Barbuda, which is planning a green, just transition of the workforce by 2030 as part of their NDC strategy. We must encourage other countries to follow their lead and substantially shift their policies in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Today, we have an excellent panel here in person, which is really exciting, to discuss how to accelerate climate action and ambition in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in turn, how these efforts can help achieve a successful COP26 in Glasgow in November. But before I turn to the panel, which will be moderated by Ambassador Sofia Borges, Senior Vice President of the UN Foundation and former permanent representative of Timor-Leste to the United Nations, we will hear opening remarks from Ambassador Jose Blanco Conde, permanent representative of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations. Ambassador Blanco, welcome back to IPI. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Dominican Republic, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to this very important event, the Road to Glasgow. That's what we call it. Let me start by extending our thanks to our kind host today, the International Peace Institute, and the collaboration of the UN Foundation, our friend Sofia Borges, and IOSIS for making this event possible. We embark on this initiative so that we can bring attention to the global climate change challenges we as an island nations are facing. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report reaffirmed what we are already facing among our group of nations. And we must begin taking measures that we can no longer postpone, given our responsibility and commitment to the world. The warnings have never been clearer. Climate change is here, and we have already seen the effects in the Latin American and the Caribbean. As a small island developing state, my country has already experienced continues to face the catastrophic impacts of climate change. Every year, natural disaster, droughts, and other environmental events are increasing in both frequency and intensity, causing deadly damage and affecting the livelihood of our citizens. The situation is very serious. If we want to see real changes, we need to start addressing climate change now. This opportunity could not have come at a more pivotal time, with only a few months away from COP26. We have the possibility to work together on how to overcome challenges and prepare for the November meetings. Once again, we welcome the distinguished panelists of this morning, and we hope to have all these recommendations, best practices, lessons learned on how Latin America and the Caribbean can achieve its climate goal and stay in track with the Paris agreements and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Looking forward for your participation. Thank you all, and we're ready to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Blanco, and let me also join others in saying thank you to our partners for this event, the IPI Institute, the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic, and also to welcome our distinguished panelists. Excellency, nice to see you and to meet you. And I'm delighted to be moderating this event. My name is Sofia Borges. I'm the Senior Vice President at UN Foundation. And this year, the UN General Assembly will be a key opportunity to enhance climate ambition in several critical sectors. The UN Food Systems Summit will unleash ambitious new actions and solutions to transform our food systems while delivering across all sustainable development goals. Similarly, the high-level dialogue on energy will help advance action on energy-related goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In October, the high-level segment of the Convention of Biological Diversity will also provide space to mobilize action on the nature-climate change nexus. Overall, these key upcoming international moments are important opportunities to leverage efforts towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. The Latin American and Caribbean region is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The countries in this region are in an arduous position of trying to pursue sustainable development and recover from the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 while navigating the dangerous effects of climate change. We know that climate change exacerbates the causes of conflict and instability, further complicating the road to a peaceful and sustainable future. Many countries in the regions are exposed to multiple climate-related hazards. Tropical cyclones, floods, droughts, and heat waves are all having an impact on cities, agricultural productivity, human health, and biodiversity. The recent devastation in Haiti and Mexico caused by the Hurricane Grace is evidence of this. In Central America, the hurricane season of 2020 broke all records, with 2 major hurricanes hitting Central America in less than 2 weeks. Small island developing states are particularly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change, the effects of which only exacerbate the issues they face, particularly related to debt sustainability in the region, which has been made worse by the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, as much as 80% of Caribbean coral reefs have been lost in recent years, in part due to a changing and variable climate, a trend that has severe impacts on the region's fishing and tourism industries. Unless urgent action is taken, climate change can also have severe impacts on food security and nutrition. According to the latest projections, climate impacts can lead to a 20% decline in crop yields for beans and maize in Central America and in the Caribbean by 2050. Despite the challenges, countries in the region are also uniquely positioned to address the climate crisis, and the region is already showing leadership in this. Almost half of the area of the Latin American and Caribbean region covered by forests represent over half of the world's remaining primary forest and storing vast amount of carbon. Protecting and restoring the region's remaining forests will be crucial to help avoid and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect critical ecosystem services. We are already seeing a number of ambitious new commitments from leaders in the region that put nature-based solutions at the core of the efforts to fight climate change. Our global community deals with the effects of climate change every day, from devastating storms in the Atlantic Ocean to severe droughts in the Middle East. We must move beyond the empty promises. Now is the time for decisive and concerted action. We hope that you enjoy today's fruitful discussion as we prepare for COP26 in Glasgow this November. Let me now turn the floor to our first distinguished panelist, Her Excellency Ms. Milagros de Campos, Vice Minister of International Cooperation from the Dominican Republic, Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources. Excellency, you have the floor and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Borges. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Ms. Borges. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you so much, Ambassador Blanco and Mr. Lepel for the invitation, and thank you so much to the IPI for hosting this event today. For Dominican Republic, climate change is a priority for the government. It's a priority for the whole region. It's a priority for the Latin American and the Caribbean region. And we need to become closer and strengthen our relationship and push forward as one in this fight for climate change, because this is the major or the biggest challenge that we will face after COVID-19 that we're already facing, and we need urgent action. And this is the message that our president has been pushing forward for the last year, and we are very, very happy to be here at this event with the panelists here today, adding a voice to the conversation, adding a voice to the fight. During the COVID-19, during this pandemic, the pandemic has exposed the structural issues that Latin America faces in our development models, in our economic models. And this has deepened also the inequalities in the country, the social inequalities, the economic inequalities that our countries face. The Latin American Caribbean region is the region that is the highest indebted, and it's the second least financed in terms of climate change. And this is something that we need to address. This is something that we need to push forward. We need to increase our ambition. We need to show leadership, especially small island development states, which are the most vulnerable to climate change. Dominican Republic is one of the 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change. We also share the island with Haiti, which is top 3 country most vulnerable in terms of climate change. And we need to unite our voices. We need to push forward to make countries increase their ambition. We know that there's the common but differentiated responsibilities. The region is one of the ones that least contributes to climate change. For instance, for Dominican Republic, we only contribute to 0.06% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And nonetheless, we are one of the most vulnerable. So we're trying to raise our voices and make ourselves heard. And this is something that we can do only if we join together in one voice. And AOS is the most important forum for this. We are, as a government, we are pushing forward for nature-based solutions because they are the most economic solutions that we can finance and the most cost-effective solutions for countries that do not have or are not receiving as much financing as it should be receiving. And we're trying to finance projects that are in the nature-based solutions, which are also very important to create resilience in the country. We are reforesting the coastal area of the country with mangroves. We are using different reforestation strategies and techniques to create more resilience, to capture carbon, because even though we're not the most responsible and our contributions to reduce carbon, greenhouse gas emissions will not make a much difference, we do need to create and be more resilient. And this is something that we're pushing forward. We're working also with making our agriculture systems be climate smart. And we're working very much in operationalizing the RED Plus mechanism in Dominican Republic. We've been working for 10 years now, and I think by next year we'll be able to finally make the mechanism effective and have the communities that are the ones that take care of our forests receive the results-based payments. Just as a broad message, nature-based solution in the region, there's a lot of knowledge on it. There's a lot of knowledge about it. It will impact economic sectors that are key to our national system, like tourism, like fisheries, like agriculture, that are affected by the adverse effects of climate change. And we're also prioritizing the modernization and adaptation of agriculture to create more resilience to droughts, to change the technology that's obsolete and high carbon emitting. We are aware that there are some difficulties that we face, that we have, for instance, very old energy systems. However, we are improving a lot and we are diversifying our energy matrix. We are now have 24% of our energy matrix that is renewable energies, both conventional and non-conventional. And we are trying to push forward as a country to join the fight in climate change. We are mobilizing financing. We're creating the climate change financing infrastructure in the Dominican Republic, but we need more commitment. We need more finance in the region. We need that the funds that are promised can be channeled to the region, to the countries that most need it, and this is something that we're not seeing. I think that also creating and operationalizing the mechanism of loss and damages is very important, since we're facing more extreme events, extreme climate events that are becoming more imprevisible, that are becoming more strong. And we're trying also to fight and to join our voices to get more financing for adaptation. So the ratio for adaptation in the region, for financing climate change in the region, is 6-1, 6 to mitigation. So we definitely need to improve financing on adaptation to create more resilient countries. We also need to increase our ambition. We know that even though we're not the countries that contribute the most, we do need to increase ambition, and we need to push forward for emitting countries, the most emitting countries, to try to reach the goal of 1.5. We cannot live under a 2-degree scenario. We need to push forward for 1.5. So what are our challenges? Very long application processes for international finance, for climate change international finance projects, with very complex rules and mechanisms that are diffuse, that require very specific capacities, technical capacities that are not usually existent in the host countries. We have the issues that are the costs and resources of a change of paradigm, especially from the private sector, are very costly. So we need that finance to be channeled to the country. We have an economic climate that is characterized by uncertainty. So that is dissuading investment from the long-term commitments, and the repositioning of essential assets in an economic transition is very important. We have also the persistent subsidies to the emitting industries. So we need to join our voices, and we need to fight together. We have updated our NDC in December of last year. Our NDC is now 27%, which doesn't sound like a big commitment, but for Dominican Republic it's a big commitment, because 7% of that NDC now is not conditioned to international finance. So we're financing ourselves. So we're only conditioned 20%, but we're also increasing our goal gradually for 2050 to become carbon neutral. And this is a big commitment for Dominican Republic, and we definitely need finance, and we definitely need the support, and we definitely need the coordination of the international community and of our countries in the region. I think that for now, those are my opening remarks. I want to close with the inequalities that have been deepened all over the world, especially in the region, and the inequalities in the access to finance and green technologies, which are very worrying, and the big difference between Latin American countries and the rest of the world, especially between developed countries and those that are developing. This is a reality that is a starting point for the discussion in the recovery, in the green recovery post-COVID, and it's a reality that we need to overcome to create equality and inclusive and climate resilient world, especially to push forward for economic development that's compatible with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Minister, for that presentation. Let me now turn the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Watson Webson, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda, and also the Chair of the AOSIS. Ambassador, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You got me? Thanks. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Excellencies, Madam Minister, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by making an apology because I have to leave early. Ambassador Blanco, it's due to another demand that I have been requested to fulfill and accepted. So I apologize up front for that, but I want to congratulate you and others and to thank you for pulling this together and for organizing this very timely meeting to discuss what is envisioned to the goals and outcomes that are being aimed for COP26. The gaps, colleagues, in the global mitigation ambition and the need for urgent climate action were illustrated by the recent scientific findings of the IPCC, which confirmed that global average temperature will exceed the 1.5 Celsius in the next decade. Even with the submission of new and revised NDCs, the emission gap remains wide, and most commitments are still not aligned with the 1.5 degrees. That is very dangerous. It's difficult. This is particularly alarming for SIDS, as even with limiting warming to 1.5 Celsius, we are already incurring severe loss and damage, as the impact of climate change have exceeded our capacity to adapt and to build resilience. Our climate fiscal resources have been even further depleted by the COVID-19 pandemic, while public financing for adaptation continues to be insufficient. The negative impact of climate change on the sustainable development of our islands are clear. And with 2020-30 approaching us fast, we need to exponentially enhance climate action to truly ensure that nobody is left behind. And that's not an idle phrase, but it becomes an active phrase that we all work towards. In this context, I wish to highlight three main calls for action for Glasgow. Firstly, there is a need to acknowledge and address the wide emissions gap through enhanced commitment from major emitters that are aligned with the 1.5 Celsius pathway and net zero emission by 2050. The initial NDC's synthesis report by the UNFCCC affirmed that Increasing ambition in action to address climate change now is critical, and we believe this should be operationalized at the COP26. Second, we must address the persistent shortfall in the financial commitment from developed countries. The Honorable Minister just made reference to that, including the mobilization of the 100 billion goals. Although SIDS are amongst the most vulnerable, we only received 2% of the climate finance provided by the developed countries between 2016 and 2018. There is a need to simplify and harmonize the procedures to enable efficient access to climate finance. The most vulnerable countries, such as SIDS, need help and need these commitments to be kept. Additionally, financing for adaptation and resilience must be scaled up significantly to be commensurate with the increasing impact of climate change. Due to the lack of climate action, we must scale up this finance availability. We need collective finance goals, and these must be scaled up from billions to trillions, including sufficient allocation for not only mitigation, but also adaptation and addressing, minimizing, and alternate loss to address the questions of loss and damage. Again, mentioned earlier by the colleague minister. Third and final, we need to accelerate the global transition away from fossil fuel industries while climate finance continues to fall abysmally short the shore up of the finance from, and we need it showing up from billions to trillions. And we are seeing trillions being spent on fossil fuel. Subsidies over the last 5 years, the period since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, we have seen trillions in subsidy for fossil fuel. We call on all major emitters to phase out all fossil fuel subsidies as soon as possible. This is paramount, this is important, and we hope to build further momentum on this and consolidate efforts towards this call and the objectives at COP26. The postponement of COP26 of last year has resulted in significant setbacks and in finalizing the outstanding technical issues under the Paris Agreement. Work programs were slowed down and or stopped. However, noting the progress that has been made during the intersessional period, we hope to find common landing zones in Glasgow to include negotiations and transitions to full implementation of the Paris Agreement. We must move from only negotiations, and so we want to see Glasgow begin to address those questions of implementation. I thank you for, again, this opportunity to speak to you and for bringing this group together and for me to share some of the views that we have been discussing and deliberating of. We look forward to a positive outcome in Glasgow. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Webson, for that very, very powerful presentation and the roadmap to Glasgow As always, true leadership on your part on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Let me now turn the floor to Mr. Selwyn Hart, Special Advisor of the Secretary General on Climate and Assistant Secretary General for the Climate Action Team, to make his presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And first, let me thank the organizers of this event, Dominican Republic. Thank you for your leadership. AOSIS leadership sometimes comes in very small packages, but we really need the leadership of the small island developing states as the world, as the conscience of the international community in addressing the climate crisis, as well as our colleagues from UN Foundation, of course, the International Peace Institute. And all of the previous speakers have made reference to the most recent IPCC report, which, as the Secretary General he called it a code red for humanity. And the science is crystal clear. And no one should have any excuses for not knowing the consequences of our current and future actions. There is no longer any excuse. The world needs to be on an emergency footing to address the climate crisis. And urgency and ambition must drive all our actions moving forward. The good news is that we now know what we need to do to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. We must spare no effort to limit the increase in temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. I know 6 years ago, when we negotiated the Paris Agreement, there was a discussion between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. And it was a long and very difficult discussion. But the 2018 report on 1.5 of the IPCC and this most recent report should settle those arguments. It should not be a discussion. It should no longer a discussion. We should no longer be having a discussion on 2 degrees or 1.5. The discussion should be, how can we limit the increase in global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, but in a way that is fair and equitable, and recognizing that countries are starting from different starting points. And Minister, you made the point, and you made the good point about the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities in light of national circumstances. So I hope the conversation as we head towards Glasgow is not about a choice between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees Celsius. If that is a conversation, then we are asking countries to choose between survival and choose their survival. And that should not be a choice any country, any of the 193 members of the United Nations should have to make in 2021. So I hope as we head towards Glasgow, it is not about choosing 2 degrees or 1.5, but rather a conversation on how can we best achieve 1.5, keep 1.5 alive in a manner that is fair to all countries, recognizing that countries are starting from different starting points. The good news, another set of good news is, we know what to do, but we also have the tools. We have the tools to achieve a 1.5 degree world. We have the tools, both technological and financial. The IEA's most recent report on net zero by 2050 recommends, one, that we need to triple wind and solar over the course of the next decade. It also reconfirms what was stated in the IPCC report of 2018, that phasing out coal is the single most important step that can be taken to keep 1.5 degrees alive, which means that for the OECD countries, they must phase out coal by 2030, and for the rest of the world by 2040. So we know what to do. We have wind and solar more competitive and cheaper in most parts of the world. We must end the global addiction to coal. And COP26 must signal that. It must signal that the world is moving on from coal and that we're stepping up our investments in clean and renewable energy. So the choices that countries, that leaders make today and the actions that will be taken over the course of the next decade, not 2050, but actions taken, decisions taken now, and actions taken over the course of the next decade will largely determine the future of humanity. They will largely determine whether we live in a 1.5-degree world, which will be more climate insecure, but at least it provides all of us and our people with a fighting chance to realize their full potential, or whether we breach that 1.5-degree goal and live in a world that is more insecure, climate insecure, a world where conflict is fuel, a world where that is not fair, and a world that is unsustainable. So those are the start choices that we have as we head towards Glasgow. And Glasgow must be seen not as a destination, but an important political milestone. A political milestone where we accelerate action on all the fronts that all of the colleagues here have mentioned. And this is why the Secretary General has identified 3 priorities and 3 numbers attached to each of the priorities. 1.5. We must do all that we can to keep the 1.5-degree goal within reach. Secondly, on finance, as everyone else has said, we must align all public and private finance with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and it starts with a $100 billion commitment that was made over a decade ago. We're about $20 billion short. That commitment has not been met. Even when one uses the OECD numbers, we're still $20 billion short of the $100 billion commitment. At Glasgow, we must absolutely get new and more significant pledges on the table to ensure that we're able to credibly close that gap and finally fulfill that decades-long commitment. But this $100 billion must serve as a floor, but it's an important trust and confidence building measure. And as a result of COVID, countries need public, low-cost finance more than ever to transition to a climate resilient, low-carbon future. And the final number is on adaptation and resilience. At present, only 20% of total climate finance flows go towards adaptation and resilience. And this is about $16.7 billion a year, when the estimated adaptation costs in the developing world will rise to approximately $300 billion a year. So we compare $16.7 billion to $300 billion. And this is not only measured in dollars and cents, but this is measured in lives and livelihoods. When one looks at the impacts of the climate extremes that we're seeing, it is costing lives and livelihoods all over the world, not only in the developed world, but also, and more lives are being lost from drought, from flooding, from wildfires in the developing countries. So part of the response at Glasgow must be to significantly increase climate finance. And the SG has put a figure on the table. He's calling for at least 50% of all public climate finance to be devoted towards adaptation and resilience. At least 50%. It's not enough, but it's an important signal from bilateral donors and from the MDBs that the needs of the most vulnerable, SIDS, LDCs in Africa and African countries and Latin American countries who are on the front lines of the climate crisis, that their needs will be taken into account. At least 50%. And we've seen some good response from some key governments. Denmark has recently allocated 60% of their public climate finance towards adaptation and resilience. The Netherlands, 69% of their climate finance is now devoted towards adaptation and resilience. We need all of your voices to pressure and encourage governments, developed country governments, to increase their adaptation finance. It does not mean that less should be devoted to mitigation. To the contrary, private finance has a clear profit motive for mitigation projects. And the economics of a mitigation and an adaptation project are completely different. Adaptation and resilience projects depend heavily on public finance. They need that public finance. While for many mitigation projects, as I said, there's a clear private sector and profit motive, and they require less public finance. So please raise your voices in support of this 50% call by the Secretary General. So colleagues, we have reached this fork in the road moment. I think we're at this fork in the road moment where Glasgow represents that fork in the road moment. If we deliver on 1.5, on the 100 billion, on 50% on adaptation, we take the fort that provides us and all of us with a fighting chance to ensure a fair, more equitable, and sustainable world. However, if we fail to achieve these very achievable goals at Glasgow, we take a completely different direction. I am hoping that leaders will make the right decisions at Glasgow and ensure that the decisions and actions to be taken over the next decade provide us with an opportunity, all of us with an opportunity to realize our full potential. I thank you.
Thank you very much, ASG Hart. And let me now turn to our final presenter, Ms. Jimena Rush, who is the Senior Fellow and Head of Peace and Sustainable Development at the IPI Institute. The floor is yours, Jimena.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, partners. I'm delighted to be here at one of our first semi-hybrid events back in the 12th floor. And it's really great to be the last speaker and be able to listen and reflect to everything that has been said today. But I want to start with a story today, which is back in 2011, we were forced into an urgent moment. And here my friend Selvin was there as well. And it was that we learned of a secret meeting from the major, some of the major emitters were having, and it was secret, but they were planning that the Paris Agreement should start being negotiated in 2015, and that in 2020 it should be adopted. And you remember that night, right? So it's 2021 now. Can you imagine if we had agreed to those terms in 2020? We would not have a Paris Agreement. The only way we reversed that decision was by the force of all the ants, what I call, all the small countries coming together and joining forces. We joined, ILAC joined with AOSIS, with the LDCs, with many of the African countries, and it was only through the aggregation of small countries, small and medium countries, that we reversed this decision, and we agreed that Paris had to be finalized by 2015. So the story has a very important message, which is that we can no longer delay decisions. And secondly, that sometimes as small countries, we feel a paralyzing effect when we have bigger countries in the room. But I think that the leadership that's needed is almost always coming from small and medium-sized countries. So it is very important to use Glasgow as that opportunity of coming together as SICA, as CARICOM, as ILAC, and then as IOSIS, the African Union, to really push for much more ambitious decisions in order to avert the worst climate scenarios. So with that, I have three main points today, which is I'll delve a little bit on the crossroads or forking the road, as Ambassador Hart mentioned. Then I will speak a little bit about my beloved region of Latin America, and then I'll end with some questions. So on the fork of the road, little did we know in 2015 that we would have a major global pandemic today. Also, we didn't know that in our region we would have growing populism that would hamper climate as a part of the political agenda. We didn't know that the US role would shift so dramatically as we saw with the irresponsible pullout in Afghanistan. And honestly, we didn't know that the role of the UN was shifting and perhaps even shrinking at the expense, again, of small and vulnerable countries that do not have a place in the G20 or in the WEF. And as well, the other part is that even though the linkages with peace and security remain acutely clear, they still remain very dim. And climate refugees from Guatemala, from Central America continue to flow in, and we don't see any shifts in the peace and security debate. Moreover, it's not only the peace and security architecture and the multilateral architecture that's still slow in adapt, but also our own consciousness has to shift, because from the UN survey, the UN at 75 survey mentioned that the first priority in people's mind is access to basic services and health, of course. And climate is second priority, but it's seen as a mid-term or future priority. So our consciousness also needs to evolve, because the time is now, right? So our governments, our multilateral institutions, and our peoples, all of us need to shift and understand that this is truly a climate emergency. And that's why I was so glad to hear from the Vice Minister that the Dominican Republic climate is a priority, because we need that type of leadership in all cabinets for those shifts to really happen. So in Latin America, I spoke a little bit about the political swings deeply affecting climate action. And we saw that with the former US administration, but we're now seeing it in Brazil and in Mexico. Brazil being a leader on forests is really, really worrying that, that it's not showing the needed leadership. And Mexico, who was the chair of COP16 after Copenhagen, Mexico played a super important role, and now we're seeing it backtrack. So I think it's really, really important for Latin American countries and for our friends in the Secretary General's office to apply a lot more peer pressure on countries that are backtracking on their former leadership. And in order to avoid those political swings, we also need to make sure that our domestic constituencies recognize the importance of climate action, because if our domestic constituencies recognize that, then it's harder for the political swings to sway the climate agenda depending on who's in power. So as a conclusion, I would say that Latin America has such a great potential being a mega diverse region. We could be leaders on renewables. We could see CARICOM and SICA doing regional arrangements on trade and on border that really innovate and show the way for the rest of the world. Barbados, the country our friend is from, is leading the way through renewable energy and putting a really strong climate neutral. We need that type of leadership. And the Dominican Republic wearing so many hats. They're in SICA, they're in AOSIS, they're in the small island, like they're everywhere, right? Those are the nimble, small countries that can actually help us broker important decisions at COP26. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jimena, and your comments about the power of the small states resonates, and we see time and time again how when we coalesce and build, have an end game in terms of an achievement, that we can accomplish very much. And so key to Glasgow is the coalition building amongst the small states. Thank you to all our panelists for their presentations. We are now going to turn the mic over to the floor, and I understand that we have the permanent representative of Guatemala who would like to take the floor. And let me... And there will be a slight lag, and it's Ambassador Padilla. Ambassador, you have the floor, and we await your comments.
Thank you very much. My name is Rita Michan. I am a permanent representative to the UN of Guatemala, but I am an ambassador at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in charge of climate change. And I was given the opportunity to say a few remarks. First of all, I want to thank the IPI for this meeting, as well as the Dominican Republic, and of course, the panelists and the UN Foundation. I have heard attentively all the panelists' remarks, and I think we are on a good road towards Glasgow. I think a lot of things have been said that are important and that we could underline, but mainly I would like to just say a few data information that I think it imposes our attention. As you all know, the Central American and Caribbean region is characterized by its biodiversity richness, and it is also have been recognized amongst the 15th most vulnerable regions of the world due to the multiplying disasters that impact year after year, imposing a negative effect on socioeconomic development. Its geographic location of Central America, even though it's not an island, it is being influenced by both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, generating climate risks such as droughts, floods, hurricanes, landslides, earthquakes, volcanic activities, heat waves, forest fires, amongst others. The Vice President, President Lupel mentioned we are being flooded or being burned. And this is a dynamic in our regions. According to ECLAC's report 2020 of 2020, in the last 20 years, hydrometeorological climate disasters have generated an economic cost of $41 million on loss and damages. On the other hand, the UN classified the region as the second most prone to disasters, stating that between 2010 and 2020, 147 climatic events have occurred directly affecting 18.5 million people. That is 30.3% of the total population. In total, it is estimated that 17 hurricanes take place per year, 23 of category 5, 548 floods, 330 storms, 75 earthquakes, 74 droughts, 65 landslides, 50 centigrade temperature, extreme temperature, 38 volcanic events, amongst others. Regarding forest fires, a total of 84,240 fires accounted 2005-2010, all of which affected an estimated of more than 2,211,787.1 hectares. Sea levels are also rising. Agriculture is at stake, undermining future food security. The dry corridor is in constant growth since the year 2000, and by 2050, it is estimated that it will be 100 kilometers, 100 to 400 kilometers wide, which will include 90% of the Mesoamerican population, all of which will be critical for sustaining our rich biodiversity and ecosystems, putting 70% of our crops at risk. Dear colleagues, the list of data goes on, and it's not data. It's something that we're suffering day by day, and people are suffering. Our infrastructure is suffering. And today, our biodiversity is still considered to represent 50% of the planet's biodiversity, where 40% of the world's flora and fauna can be found. And all of it is under pressure and at risk due to climate change. Colleagues, we need to ensure that the international community realizes all of which is at stake. Yes, our people and our natural heritage will be lost. It is only us who will lose? No, Our natural heritage is not only ours to keep and protect, it is for all humanity, and we have a moral responsibility to the planet and to all humanity. Today, I ask of you to continue doing these efforts in order to reflect and ask ourselves, can we afford to lose what may support life expectancy on Earth? If your answer is no, I invite you to continue uniting your voices towards the 70th General Assembly, which is in a couple of weeks, as well as towards Glasgow COP26, and make sure we present a strong and united message in which all of our neighbors understand why we unite in solidarity future of our natural habitat for the well-being of our children and grandchildren, that is to say, the future generations. May God bless us all and enlighten our paths. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Michan. We're now in the interactive segment, and so please do send questions through for our panelists. And just wondering if you had any comments or reactions to the statement or the commentary by the ambassador. Otherwise, I might start with you, Madam Vice Minister, and ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah? Or did you want to react? No? There's a lot of discussion about the need to have more clearly defined global goals on adaptation. How do the leaders in your region think about this critical question?
I think
You spoke a lot about leadership.
yes,
And
yes, and I'm very happy that Ms. Jimena mentioned the many hats that Dominican Republic wears, which we are happy to put in service of the whole region. We are members of GRULAC, SICA, AOSIS, and we all have common objectives. So I think that it's very important to unite our voices and have the common message. Yesterday, the governments of Argentina, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama, Barbados, Chile, and Dominican Republic hosted a high-level dialogue on climate action in the Americas. And it was a very important forum because we shared there our constraints, our priorities, and the actions we're taking. It was a day-long event, and there was also presence from Spec Carry, so the U.S. was present as well. We discussed the economic effects of climate change in the region and the Latin American Caribbean region. And we see that there's a 7% constraint in the GDP in 2021, and the investment rate for climate change is only 18% in the region, which is very low. The service to debt ratio, the service to debt is 60% of exports, and that does not help low carbon recovery. We don't have the capacity to mobilize funds, and the funding that is being mobilized is not aligned to climate action. Brown investment is 4-to-1 from green investments. We are also facing the very, very, very close issue of climate migration for the region. And this is an issue that we will need to face very soon. Some countries are already facing it, some small island developing states. But we definitely need to put our voices together. The cost of inaction by 2050 will be considerably higher than the cost of urgent action right now. We need regional initiatives, and some of the solutions that were discussed yesterday in that event were, for instance, climate for debt swaps, which is very important for the region since it's the most highly indebted region in the whole world. A resilience fund for the Caribbean, green bonds. Only 3.8% of the Latin American Caribbean market is green bonds, whilst 86% in developed countries. Sustainable finance taxonomies is very important, also solution, and applying climate risk scenarios on public investment. Social carbon pricing is another source of financing that will help our countries transition towards a green development model. Increased multilateral financing, which we all mentioned here today, and the structural changes in the electric mobility market. Some of the most important Glasgow outcomes that we are expecting as a region are finalizing the Paris rulebook, and we need real outcomes. We need real outcomes from Glasgow, and I cannot stress this enough. We have been waiting for this event now for a year. This has been delayed for a year. We need to finalize negotiations on Article 6, and we need to make this agreement operative. This has to stop being a topic that is reserved for international agendas. We need to include this in our local agendas, and the challenge is global. Our actions have to be local, but the leadership is shared.
Indeed, shared leadership. I wanted to come back to that point you made in your presentation about capacity constraints in accessing climate financing. I come from Timor-Leste, a small island developing state, which has been on the agenda of the UN for a very, very long time and has huge capacity constraints. Difficult, probably impossible to access that. What are some of the ways that you can go about in supporting, in building that capacity?
We need ready-made projects. We need this financing institutions to help us, to help our countries develop financing proposals, because we don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity, the technical capacity, the human capacity, or the time, and we need urgent action. So the processes to access financing, international finances, are very long. For instance, in average, the time it takes since you submit a project to the Green Climate Fund until you get it approved is in average a year and a half. By the time you get a project approved, it might not even be a priority anymore. So you see that private investments, the private sector is not accessing this fund. The public sector has a lot of issues, has a lot of priorities, and it needs to balance all of those priorities at the same time, and we're not receiving the financing in time. We don't have the capacity to create the projects, to develop the projects, so we need ready-made projects. We need to have international financing institutions closer to the region. The Green Climate Fund that has the biggest mission, I think, right now between financing institutions is in South Korea. Very far. They don't have regional offices. Their office and their financing has been mostly channeled to Pacific Islands and to Central Asia, which also is a region that needs a lot of financing, but we're seeing that the Latin American Caribbean region is the second least financed. So we need it closer to us. We need the Green Climate Fund to see what our constraints are as a region, what our priorities are, and what the impact of their financing can be in our region.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll turn to you, Selwyn. In my remarks, I spoke about the moments on the calendar this year heading into Glasgow. Just wanted to know, how is it that we can think about these moments, the COP26, the Biodiversity, Desertification and Land Degradation Summit, the Food System Summit, the Energy Summit during UNGA? How can we identify opportunities to make synergies across these thematic areas and have a more holistic approach in delivering on what is, as you say, a climate emergency?
Thank you so much. And yes, we have we have a significant amount of important political moments over the course of this year, really to advance this broader the broader 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we use all of these moments rather than focusing really on the specific SDG or the specific issues. Look at all of these moments as being absolutely critical for advancing this broader agenda. And they're all interlinked. As Ambassador Rita said in her intervention, the Latin American and Caribbean region houses about 50% of the global biodiversity, right? And climate exacerbates and threatens habitats, and it threatens species, and it significantly threatens the biodiversity of the Latin American and Caribbean region. So if we're seeking to solve biodiversity, we cannot solve biodiversity without addressing the global climate crisis. And therefore solutions like all of you have spoken about nature-based solutions, right? Nature-based solutions represent really a really great intersection between climate and biodiversity. And we really need to look at how these agendas should not be seen as separate or distinct, even though they might be covered under different conventions. They must be seen as an integrated whole and contributing to the overall achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The high-level dialogue on energy, in our view, should really send a very strong signal on SDG 7. We're really way off track from addressing SDG 7. It is, dare say, if I can, as a UN official, scandalous that in 2021, 800 million people, close to 800 million people around the world still don't have access to electricity. 800 million persons in our world cannot conduct a life of dignity because they don't have access to energy and electricity services. We need to eliminate and close this gap over the course of the next decade. Energy access and decarbonization of global energy system, they're not separate choices where one should not be seen, and we're hoping that the high-level dialogue on energy transmits this message as separate and distinct agendas. You provide energy access, but you don't address issues related to decarbonization of energy system. Anyone who sets that up as a choice, it's a false choice. They're two sides of the same coin. So we're hoping that these events over the course, these really important political moments, help us to transmit that message that we're not trying to solve climate at the expense of energy access, or that we're not trying to address biodiversity at the expense of climate or energy or food security. They're all part of a single whole. And finally, we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity, recovering from COVID. Our region, the Latin American and Caribbean region, we're the most indebted region, and we are the region that has the least fiscal space in terms of stimulating our economies. So therefore, debt relief, as the minister said, must be an important component of the recovery. Debt relief must be important. But that debt relief, in my view, should be conditioned on making these investments, right? Making these investments on climate, on clean energy, making these investments on preserving biological diversity. So let us use this once-in-a-generation moment of COVID recovery, where a significant injection of stimulus resources will be needed to our region, to the Latin American and Caribbean region, and the other developing regions as well, but we're focused on the Latin American region. Use this once-in-a-generation moment to send a clear message that we need these investments across the board in biodiversity, clean energy, climate, food systems and food security, and propel a generation of growth and prosperity and sustainability and equality in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Hope I answered.
Indeed, you did comprehensively. But I wanted to get Jimena's take on that as well, because you spoke a bit about the landscape that we traverse at this moment. You spoke about the role of small states in achieving the success when coming together. What does success look like for the small states during UNGA this year?
It's a big question. It was so lovely to see Rita on the screen as well. It's kind of a paradox, the amount of meetings that we have and the action on the ground. It does not correlate, and so it's a big problem when we see that the aggregate amount of NDCs only lowered. It's 1%, right? Hopefully, so it's really stark the moment that we're in terms of how do we translate like the momentum and the pledges into real life implementation and shifts. So while we do need this kind of like glamorous moments in the international community. The most important aspect is at home. How do we shift things at home? And so with COVID, like incredibly impacting this and the fact that COP26 will hopefully happen in person as an in-person event, we really need to be a lot more honest and candid about what we can give and then commit to that. So I would really say that it's really heartening to see this in a lot more of multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the Race to Zero and the private sector, the civil society, Fridays for the Future. We are seeing movements from the bottom up that are demanding our leaders, but I would say to all youth and to everyone in civil society that they need to keep the pressure up. We need the type of making leaders uncomfortable on this topic so that we make the shifts at home. Thank you.
What does success look like for the Dominican Republic, Madam Vice Minister?
I think a commitment on financing adaptation, a higher commitment on financing adaptation, finalizing the negotiation of Article 6, which will provide a additional funding source for a green transition, for a green recovery, and for innovative mechanisms, a mechanism for financing loss and damages that is operative and accessible, and easier and faster access to international financing.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the floor? I don't think so. So let me now thank you very much to all our panelists for this very interesting and fruitful, rich discussion. I'm now going to turn the floor to Ambassador Blanco, who is going to close out with a few remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sofia. Well, we have reached the end of our event today. As we have heard over the course of the discussion this morning, there is still much work to do in order to address climate change and to strengthen the mechanism for climate action. I would like to thank the panelists, Ambassador Webson, our Vice Minister Milagros de Camps, our good friend Selwyn Hart, and our good friend Leiva Roach. Your presentations and the knowledge shared with us has been invaluable, and without any doubt has helped make the event a great success. We also want to take the time to thank all of those who have been involved in the organization of this event, especially IPI and our colleagues from the mission of the Dominican Republic. We look forward to working together in the future to be able to get the world back on track on the commitments made by countries under the Paris Agreement. Thank you all.